Knicks back in action. Juice Bar a dish. Sean Little saw our guys in person. Cat and Brunson. We're not seeing them on the same team. Out of the East, I digress. All right, coming out of the break. Knicks only played 3 games on with 3+ days of rest, not including the season opener, and 2-1 in those games. No more breaks. Every game coming on 2 days rest or less, Sean. First things first, how important was the Knicks break to recharge, reset? Positive news about OG not getting hurt long term as well. Talk to me all things break.
Yeah, this is if any team needs a break or rest and benefits most from it, it's the New York Knicks.
Yeah.
So I'm glad they got some time. That's the only positive of Josh Hart not being an all-star, is he gets to go hang out and truly get off his feet and recharge the batteries.
Yeah.
Gives time for OG to work on that foot as well. And we talked about the format. So, not a lot of minutes played for
Kinda
Cat
nice.
or Jalen Brunson.
Big
So
W for Knicks fans.
that's a win in that aspect. So, yeah, this team benefits from rest. There was a stretch a couple weeks ago where they had a couple days off and they looked like a completely different team.
Absolutely.
So when they came out of that break, they just looked a lot more efficient. The rotations are there. That's when the defense does look better, when they're rested. Now, they were essentially in MSG the entire month of February. There's a lot of games coming down the stretch here that are going to be on the road.
Yeah.
So that takes a little bit of a toll on you as well, but they'll be ready. The offense is getting better. It's the defense and the three-point defense that's going to have to be worked on this backstretch.
Before we get into the schedule and the all things second half, Mitch seems to be making his trend towards getting back.
Yep.
Positive news. Ian Bagley. Big positive news out of the Knicks camp. Just thoughts real quick on how you'd like to see Mitch be rolled out. Precious has given the Knicks some incredible minutes. Incredible minutes.
Yeah.
So what do you see on the rollout, all things Mitch Rob, here in the first couple weeks?
With Mitch coming back from this injury, the key was get him back and healthy fully.
Mm-hmm.
No need to rush. No need to do anything. And that's what the Knicks have been doing. And he's been very deliberate about his social media posts. He's been posting like a practice jersey and almost there, locked and loaded, yada, yada, yada. So I think when he finally steps on, he'll be ready to go, and they'll ease him in on the minutes restriction and all that stuff. And this is the perfect amount of time. It's funny because the All-Star break, people think it's like in the middle of the season. It's like the back half. It's like the third quarter poll rather than the halftime poll. So this next 25 games going into the playoffs should be plenty of time for him to get acclimated and rolling. So ease him in, and then when he gets comfortable and ready to go and all lights are green, let him off the leash. And let's not forget, the guy, when he's on the floor, wreaks havoc on the offensive glass, on defense against bigs. He's your classic rim-protecting, rebounding big. And he can run the floor a little bit.
He can.
When he's healthy and engaged.
Well, it's a great point you made, too. In the Garden, I don't want to say it's missing from last year, a little bit of that. But, man, you know this. When a defensive play is made in the Garden or an extra effort play, it erupts the whole mezzanine.
Like a three-pointer would.
And that's exactly. And that's something that I think this team on defense is sorely missing. And he's going to be a huge impact.
Have you ever heard
he gets in.
You ever heard of the Phil Jackson rule?
Depends
or one of the Phil
which one?
Jackson isms. Essentially, if you win 40 games before 20 losses,
of course.
You're taken seriously
Yeah.
as a title contender. 37 of the last 41 champs won 40 before losing 20.
Yep.
OKC, the Cavs, and the Celtics have already done so. Knicks, 36-18. Need 4 Ws before 2 Ls. Couple tough games here coming up. But they're right in that window and can get to 40 wins before 20 Ls.
Yeah, let's talk 28 games, including the Bulls coming back from break, remain. Second half schedule is the 8th toughest in the NBA slate of all things schedule. Looking at them, best in the league on 1 day's rest, 25-9, 15-3 off the losses. Next 4 games, hosting Chicago, as we mentioned, but they're at Cleveland, at Boston, back home against Philly on the 26th of February. That's a big start to the second half here, Sean. Before we get overall records on the second half, talk to me just about this first 4-game slate. Your Bulls, obviously, I know you're hard on those boys. They're in a little bit of a, I don't want to say rebuild, but restructure.
No, it's not a rebuild. It's
Restructure.
just the culture now. They're just a poorly run franchise. This is every year.
But as you see behind us on the juice bar, if you're watching
definition
visually,
of rebuilding is like you're building something. They have the schematics, and that's about all.
That's fair.
Yeah.
So Chicago, Cleveland, Boston, Philly, 2 road, 2 home. Let's focus on at Cleveland, at Boston. We've seen these matchups. Obviously, that Saturday night we were in person, night before the big game. Chiefs catching an L. We saw Boston come out. Tatum was assertive. That was Boston.
He was on fire. He was enormous that night. He killed the Knicks.
But we know this about the Celtics, who are the second worst home favorite in the NBA against the spread. They lose games, drop games. They had just dropped a Mavericks game that they shouldn't have dropped with no AD. Now it was half their roster. So they typically, on a timing-wise, bounce back, and that was the Knicks that night. Anything you want to see, though, in the Cleveland matchup, now that they got DeAndre Hunter in the mix, at Cleveland the second game back?
Yeah, let's be honest. These are 2 massive games, and they're on the road.
Yeah.
They've lost to the Celtics twice already.
Mm-hmm.
I believe they've lost to. Did they lose to the Cavs earlier in the year?
Lost to Cleveland. Did we lose? Us.
I know they lost.
We definitely lost one.
Yeah. So, a lot of the chatter around the squad is you guys have been playing at home, and when you play the big dogs, you have trouble.
Yep.
Well, now you have to go on the road into they're the big dogs on paper and in the conversation. Like, for example, they're not the Denver Nuggets in the West where people and the odds boards have Denver potentially competing with OKC, but they're like 6th in the West. This is the number 1 team in the West, or in the East in the Cavs, and the number 2 team in the East in the Boston Celtics. The Knicks are number 3, and you have to go in their building and compete. There's no way around it. They're measuring stick games, and
it's a good way to put it.
I don't know this off the top of my head, but I would be very interested to see if you got swept by a team in the regular season. I don't know if any team's ever beat that team in the playoffs in a 7-game series. If the Knicks go 0-3 versus the Celtics, I don't see why people should or would be confident outside of us and nuclear Knicks fans that know them on a night-to-night basis. But we played them 3 times. We lost 3 times. And now we're going to play them in a playoff series.
Just to push back a little bit on that, is 0.0 of that situational, like just mentioning Mavs beat the Celtics, they come out dialed, like rest advantages,
you can
spots.
figure out an excuse for anything. Like the first one was the first game of the year, and it was the first game with Cat, and it was the first, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a new team. Like, still, but
this isn't the NFL in your opinion.
They're the champs. They've beat us 2 times in a row in our building. Now we have to go to theirs, and if like it or not, it's more than just a regular season game, and I'm excited to see how they show up and compete.
Now, one thing on the Cleveland thing, and I did just check, this is only the second dance, unless I'm mistaken here.
Yeah, they only played once, and it fits into – it was only the 3rd game of the year.
The first couple games of the season. We remember a couple years back in the playoffs, Cleveland, they mentally, if it was a boxing match, they didn't even come close to the physicality of this Knicks team. Mentally, very fair to talk. Edge goes to Boston at the moment based off just win-loss. From a Cleveland perspective, though, let's say it's still 1-2-3 with Cleveland being the 1 and the Knicks being the 3, Boston in between them. Do you think there's anything from a couple of years back mentally, knowing that the Knicks can, we talk about styles. These are 2 defensive teams that can slow the game down, play half court. Anything in the Cleveland Knicks head-to-head thing that the Knicks can maybe bring back that they did in that playoff series a couple of years back against Cleveland? Because I can't get there with Cleveland. I can't get there that team is going to run the East. I can't get there.
We were there.
And we were there.
We were there. The Knicks, they
bullied them.
They were scared of the Knicks in that series.
Young Evan Mobley.
They wanted nothing to do with the Knicks in that series. And from the first game, you saw it. And you saw it.
And those were 9 games in the 90s.
Yeah,
that was like old school basketball.
Yeah. Now,
you think it's a different Cavs team? Because it's Kenny's team.
It's definitely a different Cavs team.
That was Bickerstaff's club.
Look, Knicks are an offensive team. You know what's the number one offense in the East? The Cavs. So, like, they could go blow for blow offensively if we just want to go about it that way.
Sure.
That series was the exact opposite, as you just mentioned. Mitchell was killing them on the glass, and they were banging. Jared Allen and Mobley were getting banged around. Randall was bullying people. They wanted nothing to do with those guys. This is a little different. They remember that. This is a completely different Knicks team, but that's not a completely different Cavs team.
No, it isn't.
So that's kind of an interesting element.
Looking at just the second half here, record predictions, 28 remaining. Knicks went 17-10 coming out of the break and went 4th to 2nd last year. As I mentioned, 8th most difficult schedule. You've been very on point with it on the Juice Bar, looking at strength of schedule.
Yeah.
So looking at really where they're at, second half. We don't have to go all the way through with a fine-tooth comb, but just any overall thoughts on a record and where they end up in the East?
They're going to be third. They're going to finish third. I think the top 3 teams in the East are already solidified.
It's like a horse race. No one's getting past anyone.
Yes, exactly. It's going to be Cavs, Celtics, Knicks. Now, the guys behind them will shake, and those are the only 3 teams that can win the East. So I don't think that changes. 4 more games on the road on this back half for the Knicks. The 3-point defense needs to get figured out.
Yeah.
Period, point blank. It's the worst in the NBA via the numbers. I know OG is out and getting healthy. He'll be back soon. In the playoffs, the reason the league is the way it is today is because Steph and Clay and those guys were demoralizing people with this wide open transition threes. And they were like, like a big dunk can either get the crowd going or pull it out. The 3-pointers that Steph and Clay were hitting in transition were just pulling the life out of teams. That's kind of what Boston does when they're playing their best. Knicks cut it to 6 before the break. Next thing you know, it's 18. Life is out of the building, and they're demoralizing shots.
Sure.
So if you have to see Boston, who shoots the 3, of course, as we know, very well, and then the Cleveland Cavaliers are the number 1 offensive team in the East, and would welcome a shootout, you got to get that cleaned up. So I'm confident they will. That is what I'm going to be keying on. And I think once Mitch gets back, people won't have to help as much at the cup and could.
Yeah, I'm hoping
the
that's a
long
little
bridges
two-pronged effect.
and the guys' length can impact the perimeter.
Well said. I got 20-8 down the stretch. Went through it game for game.
I'm not mad at that.
I got a 3 seed with you. But that's all things Knicks back in action. Second half of Dish.
Appreciate you guys watching the Juice Bar weekly. In the description below, go lock in, subscribe. Anywhere you find your audio podcast, the Juice Bar will be on there. iTunes, Spotify, across the board. Lock in. Tell a homie to tell a friend. The Juice Bar is live everywhere.